As a longtime educator, wellness instructor, and coach for women rebuilding after major life shifts, I deeply understand the challenges of reconnecting with your mind, body, and purpose so you can live grounded, confident, and whole. I'm Dr. Molly Kirby, your host, and welcome to Rooted Conversations by Reinnovate You Coaching, where your healing becomes your roots and your growth becomes your new way of being. Through grounding conversations, practical tools, and valuable insights, Rooted Conversations empowers you to reconnect with yourself, to release what no longer serves you, and to reinnovate the person you're becoming. If this sounds just like the thing you've been looking for, subscribe to the podcast and join me on this journey to reset, renew, and reinnovate you. Welcome back to Rooted Conversations. Today I'm joined by my really good friend, Katie Rucker, a partner in a second-generation women-led family business and a certified futurist. Today we're discussing a monumental mind shift change that can help us navigate those difficult life transitions. So welcome, Katie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
All right, I'd like to get started by just telling all of our listeners a little bit about yourself and what is a futurist.
Gosh, I love it. Thank you so much for this chat. We were just chatting off camera, more of just like how it's just so fun to be able to know people and become such dear friends with people from all over the country. So, Molly and I met in Southern California. So, I am, as you said, a second generation family owned business. I run my business with my twin sister. We took over our dad's company. We are a human insights and foresight consulting firm. And that's changed over time. We've been in business for 41 years. So as you can think that futures talk and futurist wasn't something that was as much of a hot button back in 1985. So it's been a really interesting journey for us. Foresight and futures work was my COVID hobby, actually. I always say it was my lovingly, instead of making sourdough bread, I became a certified futurist. And really, there's a wide variety. And when we do a lot of the work, that we do through workshops and cohorts and trainings and coaching in this space, we talk about kind of the difference between strategic foresight, which is more of a structured way of doing things, right? Around foresight and futures work. I always say it's kind of like your toolbox, that there's like a wide variety of tools that can be repeated over and over again. In futures thinking, I think that we all have the ability. So I'm on a mission to create like a whole army and brigade of everyday futurists. That really, I see that more of a mindset that really is that we're leading our lives every day with courage, conversation, and curiosity. It's being able to think about the future in in multiples. So futures work, there's an S at the end of futures, and it's not a misspelling. No, I do misspell a lot of words. It's intentional to have that. There is actually an infinite number of possibilities of what can unfold in the future. I always love to say, like, my life will be changed just by this conversation that we have today, because it's something I'm going to think about something differently. And I could have been going down this path of the future, but one conversation, as we know, can change the trajectory of where we're going. And so if we allow ourselves and our space to be open to the infinite number of possibilities and lead into that with, again, curiosity, hope, interest, desire to think differently, we are more resilient as the future starts to unfold in front of us. So I get super passionate about this topic.
Yeah. So right now, the futurism just seems really important. So
Mhm.
why do you think it's important right now? And for my listeners, a lot of these are women who are in transition transitions, such as empty nesters, people that are going through retirement or career shifts. So how do you think that's applicable, and why is that so important?
Yeah, so I think when I'm 2 years away from empty nesting, so I have like a whole vision. So I use this even as an example, right? So my husband and I, a couple years ago, I was like, "Hey, we got to actually start like making sure that we still like each other, because in 5 years we're going to be like all by ourselves." And now we have 2 years left, and we've come up with this dream that we want to put our house into storage and rent it out, and then get a motor home and drive around the U.S. like while we can do that, because I can work from the road. So that's my, like, I'm planning for the future, right? And so that is one vision of what I think can happen. When we anchor ourselves in the one vision and like we're like, this is the path that I'm going to be working towards. As we all know, and especially even right now, I feel like it's even more so, life happens. So if we're kind of
Mhm.
like the boat that's like cruising along, the huge tsunami wave can come and like move us into this totally different
Right.
direction. And we feel out of control. We feel like we don't have life is happening to us versus for us, or like all those different kinds of cliches, but they really are because we've anchored ourselves into one version of the future. The thing about futures thinking is, and again with the infinite number of possibilities, and one of the tools in strategic foresight is the cone of possibility. And I always kind of say, like, here, if we think actually in multiples and you allow yourselves to start exploring different versions of what it could potentially feel like, potentially none of those might happen, but when you actually allow yourself that sense of like play and exploration and imagination, you say, gosh, what if these dots actually happened? How would I feel in 5 years from now? What would I do? What if this version actually happened? How would I feel? What would I do? You become more resilient and more of a, I'm going to say, a participant in what's unfolding in front of you instead of feeling like it's just happening to you. And again, it for me, it's all around, especially with life transition times, it's actually taking back the agency and ownership that we have over where we're going in the future. And when we allow ourselves to explore multiple versions of what can unfold, which would be like different scenarios, which again, scenario planning is a tool and strategic foresight, we then can start to one, I feel like you can start to see possibilities everywhere instead of like when you've anchored yourself on this one version of what it's going to be. The most amazing opportunities can be knocking on your door. But if you're like, it doesn't fit this version, you're not even seeing those opportunities. So again, it's actually opening ourselves up in the aperture of what we can start to see when we think in multiples, which again, it's having to slow down in a world that's telling us that if you slow down, you're behind. But I do believe a differentiator for people right now is if we can slow down and explore a few different options, it just becomes more, I guess, optimistic and hopeful about where we could be going because we're seeing that we're gonna be amazing no matter where it goes. And like when we only anchor with like one version, then, like, what is the internal narrative that we tell ourselves when something doesn't go that way? We automatically think that we did something wrong, but it's just because life unfolded a different way. It actually may not have anything to do with us. But then, like, are we adding more mental gymnastics than we actually even need? So, if I'm going to spend the mental gymnastics, I want to explore multiple possibilities instead of like beating myself down, which, listen, I've done that for a long time. And that's where this has like totally changed how I see myself and see possibilities because I don't have as much as that internal, like, oh, I automatically screwed up. But I'm like, oh no, I wasn't actually supposed to go that way because that didn't actually happen. I was supposed to go this way and I'm going to just be just as fine over here.
I think a lot of times when I talk about the cone of possibilities too, is that we tend to catastrophize things. So I
Mm-hmm.
look at the cone as on one side of it being like a total, like this dystopian world that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is a utopian that,
Mm-hmm.
man, I mean, it's kind of a pipe dream that might not happen. But
Totally.
at least if I push myself toward
Yep.
that utopian, that maybe I'll hit somewhere in the middle and it won't be a
100%.
catastrophe.
Yeah.
So that's kind
Because we do have to have some sort of version of our preferred future, right? Which
Mhm.
is what we talk about. I was gonna
Right.
say like the doom and gloom and the
Yeah.
like rainbows and unicorns, right? Like the whatever it is. But we want to be able to, we got to put our anchor out there. And every day we need to show up intentionally because as much as we talk about the future, and so many people think of the future as like something that comes next, but the future is determined by the intentional actions that we take today, right? We all already know this, but it's so hard to forget because it still feels like it's so far down there. But the future is today. And what we do today is setting that tone. So if we have that preferred future where we want it to be able to go, and I like to be able to also think of our preferred future as something that should be like a living, breathing document or a living, breathing version. Because when we are intentional every single day, something else might show up. And then we're like, oh, I actually want to move my preferred future over here. Or life will happen and it's going to move it for you. But if we more, I also kind of, as obviously I talk with my hands all the time, but I think we like can move through life with like our closed fists and stuff. But I like to then say, like, how do we loosen the grip on life and loosen the grip on our desire for control? Because when we do that, so much more can flow towards us and we're more open to like what's showing up in front of us each day.
I think a lot of us, especially when we're going through our transitions, think about what is our purpose now?
Mm.
So when you retire or when you're an empty nester or something like that, you're like, my purpose is gone in life. Can this help people who are looking for purpose?
I think so, for sure. I would say, and one of the things that they say in like with futures work is the best futurists are amazing historians. So if we think about that from our sense of self also, is just because your job has finished, you are still the amazing, multifaceted, beautiful, wonderful person that you were when you first started your career and all of those different things. Like who you are and like the amazingness that you bring into the world is not gone. The vessel in which you were maybe delivering that impact is now sunsetted and you have this opportunity to do that. And so I think some of it is spending time to be able to really say, who am I at my core? What are my core values? What is the impact that I think I want to be able to make? Who do I want to try to like help impact as I'm doing that? And then even, and this kind of comes back to like the futures thinking, become curious for a while and have conversations. Go on like a curiosity tour, reach out to people. This is what you and I were just talking about.
Yeah.
Reach out to people that you've always admired and say, I'd love to have like 15 minutes and like hear a bit of your story. And this is why, right? Like we want to be intentional about the time that we're asking people to be able to pour into us. But you might be able to start finding all these different potential future versions of yourself or how you can be making that impact that's different than what you maybe thought before. So I do think a big thing is realizing and remembering who we are. Another big area that we talk a lot about is, and again, it's the way that we see the world like that the future starts today. So how we see the world and what we think about. So our mental models, our internal narratives, our limiting beliefs, whatever, that impacts the way that we see potential opportunities. So part of it is also challenging yourself to say, when was the last time I cleaned off the lens? Am I being a little closed minded, or the narratives that helped you get to where you are today, is that still the narratives that's going to serve you going forward? And spending a little bit of that time too to say, am I being open to what these potentials could be, or am I being limited because I never saw myself that way, or those types of things? So I think a lot of it, like I keep coming back to the word curiosity. I think that a lot of it comes back to leaning into curiosity and being open to thinking differently, but remembering that you, especially in that transition or even with empty nesting, right? Like being an active, engaged parent for 18 plus years,
Right.
who am I on the other side of that? That's a really interesting thing. And so spending time to get to know yourself and then figuring out, how do people see you as you? Like we see ourselves as this parent or as this employee or as this person or this, but also going on that fact finding to see, how do other people see you? What do they think that you bring to the world? Um, and collect all that information. That's again, horizon scanning is one of
Yeah.
the tools in foresight. And generally that's going to be like finding all sorts of different, like, I would say like the whispers that are happening out here that they're not full trends. But if we think about how, from a personal development standpoint, we can do that same thing, go out and figure out what those horizon scans. How do people see you? What do they think? What are the cultural changes happening? Where do you think that there might be opportunities for your unique values to be brought to the table that you've never thought about before?
It's so true. I think that women in particular, we
Mhm,
start out being daughters, and
mhm,
then we're employees, and then we're spouses, and we're moms, and all of that. And sometimes we don't ever have a chance to develop who that was that we are. A lot
mhm,
of times we rediscover, but then other times it's like we've never had that chance to go do
mhm,
those things that we had never had a chance to do.
mhm.
And it's
And
so
I think that's the
important.
changing, that comes back to the narrative change, right? Is
Mhm.
also, I think, historically, whether maybe said to us or we've just subconsciously heard it through stories of in society, is that it's selfish to put ourselves first. I think that that's a narrative that probably many women have heard, again, whether intentionally or unintentionally. But I really love to be able to shift that to say self first versus selfish. And that actually, like, we can't pour. I mean, it's again, it's coming up with all the cliches, but they all are so true. You have to put your own oxygen mask on. You can't pour from an empty cup. We have to do all these things. And what
Right.
for myself, I have two daughters, so age 20 and 16. So they're again older now. Um, I really had always committed to being able to be Katie first and foremost. And then And we were shared, like, my grandparents always said love trickles down. And so actually then it's like love yourself, love your higher being, whatever that is for yourself, love your spouse, then love your kids. And because then they're seeing this whole cycle. And like in whatever, again, your order can be different, but when you put people above yourself, it really can, then you do lose yourself, you know? And there's some decisions that I've made along the way. I'm the primary breadwinner in my family. I go on different big, huge adventures where I like leave for, a month at a time. And it's like, does that make me a horrible mom? But I think in the end, I'm actually teaching my girls that you should always come first in terms of not me saying you as my kid needs to come before me, but you as this amazing soul needs to always come first. Like you have to put yourself first so that you can then serve it to other people. So, and I think that's it. It's then listening to these whispers, like the different adventures that I've gone on. I think if I didn't allow myself to like be open to them, somebody would have said, "Hey, do you want to go do whatever?" Like, my last big one, I went to Everest Base Camp, and that was somebody had said this, and I think I never like would have even thought about that, but I was like, "Oh my gosh, when is the next time somebody might actually ever ask me that?" And I was like, "Probably never." I was like, "If I don't say yes to this now, I'm never going to do something like that." And I said yes, and I went and did it. So yeah, it's being open to seeing like where things unfold.
That is so cool. I followed that on social
Mhm.
media, by the way, your experience with that. So, speaking of some of these workshops and things, we
Mhm.
talked the last time we had a
Mm.
conversation about Alive, the
Mhm.
workshop you went to in North Carolina. Can you tell us about a little bit about that? It
Mhm.
was offered by the Future School, and some of this information I'll give you all after the podcast. But what did you learn there, and what did you all do, and how was it different from some of the experiences you've had in this futures work?
Yeah, so this one was more, it's funny because when I went and I don't even know how to, like, explain it, so I keep saying it was, like, 3 days of just, like, an immersive experience more than, like, a training, and I think the difference is we didn't learn specifically additional tools. It was more to be in the space for interesting, thoughtful conversations, utilizing some of the tools that we've had before, but really at the ethos of it. And I felt like when I left there, I was like, oh, I actually have this different way of thinking that I've been thinking. I maybe didn't have a tool or a framework or however I want to like we want to explain this. I didn't have the words to be able to explain some of the stuff that I think about. But at a macro level, a lot of the conversations that I feel like is happening out in the world right now, and the term VUCA has been around for a really long
Yes.
time, right? Like volatile, uncertain, complexity, ambiguous. I feel like and it's so that's not a new term, but like what's happening in the world today, right now, right? Which feels sometimes chaotic, it's fear-based. There's a lot of like confusion of like, where do I
Yes.
fit in the future that's unfolding around us? And so people are, and I kind of, saying this like, people are sitting here, whether it's a business or an individual, of like, okay, this is happening in the world right now. And I'm going to sit out here and I'm going to think a little bit about how do I want to be in the future, right? On the other side of this muckety muck that we're in right now. Like it's kind of the same thing. We all used to say in like the beginning, like when COVID happened, it was like, okay, I'm going to hunker down and I'm going to wait till we can go back to like normal, right? So we thought we were separate from it. And so a lot of the conversations and things that I'm hearing right now are people trying to problem solve and find solutions to kind of like, how do I arrive over here? But what we talked about and what we spent time with is the thing is we're actually never separate from what is actually happening. So alive was this different way of looking at it. So alive stands for abductive, liminal, interconnected, vibrant, and immersive. And the words that really to me really for me hit home is more of that interconnected. We are never outside of what is happening. We are actually in it. And it's not just, and it's the reminder of, um, we are interconnected to everything. We are like you and I, like while we are in two different parts of the country,
Right.
we are still interconnected energetically and being. And there's things that can be happening in my state that eventually can be affecting yours. We are interconnected to the earth and the like natural resources around us. We are interconnected to the animals. We are interconnected to all these different things. And every decision that's being made, we're actually all interconnected. And so if we actually can be reminding ourselves that we're not trying to solve to jump over a period of time. We are actually trying to figure out how do we move forward
Yeah.
in this? That then, to me, I see that it opens up the possibilities and the way that I think about potential futures, because it's reminding me that like what I'm doing is going to affect other people. And when we're trying to make decisions from the outside in, we then, I believe that we're just creating another version of the future that remains siloed, that remains divisive, that remains fearful, that remains the haves and have nots. And in my version of the preferred future that I want to pull myself towards, I want to anchor in collaborative, participatory, hope centered, joy centered,
Yes.
regenerative. And that can only happen when we sit in sometimes the uncomfortableness to remember that we are connected to all the people around us and all the things around us. And it doesn't mean like going back even to like thinking about like how do we remember who we are as like we've transitioned out of a role. It doesn't mean that I have to really change my core values and like who I am, but I actually have to also remember there are others who may have different views, different perspectives. I need to start proactively having conversations to hear other perspectives that make me a little uncomfortable. Like they say in futures work, the more uncomfortable you are, the better you're doing. Because if you only think about the future that feels very soft and fuzzy and comfy, most likely you're not preparing yourself for something that could be very different. And so again, when we can sit in that and remember our interconnectivity, and I just love the juxtaposition of like if we think about this volatile world that's happening right now, and I love the idea of thinking about it more through the lens of vibrancy, of like that actually it's this things are weird and uncomfortable and this, but like instead of seeing that through this lens of like, and I, thinking about it through like colors or whatever, that's dark, it's like it's this like whole thing. I'm like, what if that this change and this volatility, it actually is something that's like vibrant and immersive and like something's bubbling up and we get to be a part of whatever's bubbling up, and I get to play a role in trying to like shift the narrative towards something that pulls me more towards, again, the unicorns and rainbows version of the potential future. And it doesn't mean that I'm, or that any of us are like being so naive and like rose colored glasses that I'm pretending that some of the stuff that's happening around us right now is not good at all, because I see that as well. But to try to think that we can solve from the outside in, it just doesn't make any sense. And so for me, going to this experience and having these words and like helping me remember that if each and every one of us can remember that we need to try to solve it from the inside out, and like that we need to think about whatever we're creating and whatever we're doing and whatever we're hoping for in the future, it will impact other people and other things. And so we need to then do that more from a sense of compassion and grace and, again, opportunity for others besides just myself. So I guess I left that experience. It was interesting, actually. I was gonna say I left that experience more hopeful about where we can create, but actually one of the participants, and I really appreciate her bravery, um, to say this at the end. And she said, what I'm struggling with though is the pain that I'm feeling because not everybody in the world sees it this way. And I have to go back into a system because we live in systems, right? Whether it's our businesses, the education system you come from, the government
Mhm.
system, like whatever system, political system, geopolitical system, and all of that. There's not a lot of people yet who are thinking this way. And so it's hard because when you have to go back into the world that people are looking at, trying to like solve from the outside in, and it was, we all then held space to like, I'm gonna say, mourn or grieve that, right? And that was one of the other things that I took away from it. We talked about the how do you hold space to hospice in a certain way, which is an interesting word when we think about it, but hospice our past. And in that hospicing, which doesn't mean, because a lot of times it's just like this no longer exists and now I have to do this because we've been taught to like charge, 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 and especially for women, right? Like we don't have time to feel these emotions. You just got to push it all down. But actually hospicing holds space to like honor what has happened in the past, that this whatever has played a big part of it. And I know that it's time for it to start to end. And whether that's a life or whether that's a system or whether that's a whatever, you can still honor something. You can be sad about it. but you also have to start working through the idea of letting go that what once was may not exist anymore. And you have to start reimagining what's going to come next. And I think that's an interesting thing too. Um, so it's just playing off of different perspectives and mindsets about how we see the world today and how we see letting go and honoring our past, but then like reimagining and holding space for the future. And that doesn't always mean that what once was bad. It just means it's not going to work anymore in the future.
Yeah, I was first introduced to that idea at the Dragonfly journey that
Mhm.
TFSX did, and I
Yeah.
was just like, "Oh my gosh, this is such a great way to look at things, that you're really hospicing that." And
Mhm.
what I noticed with our culture and
Mhm.
also with people who are
Mhm.
going through transitions is that we get so exhausted
Mhm.
that we're at that point where there's gotta be another way, and we're easy to kinda push into a good direction then. If
Mhm.
you notice with people arguing on social media, people are so tired of it, they just stopped and they're posting pictures of kittens now.
Yeah.
Because
Mhm.
it's like, I can't do this anymore, and I've also noticed a trend for my students that I teach who are that 18 to 23, they're like, "I've been watching this happen with you all, and I
Mhm.
don't want this to be my future. There
Mhm.
has to be a better way," which is a prime opportunity for me to say, "Here's a way to look at this." So I teach
Mhm.
this in my classes. I
Mhm.
teach about how to solve public problems, how to talk about futures, and I
Mhm.
teach that cone of possibilities all the time.
Mhm.
And here's where you are in that cone, and
Mhm.
here's how you dream how this will be better. And it just seems like when we finally in history or whatever it is get to that point where we're totally exhausted and
Mhm.
just can't anymore,
Mhm.
we're able to see our way into a mind shift that makes things happen.
Yeah. And I think too, what I've been really sitting with and even like my own journey that I've been going through this for the last X number of years and then other things. And I think it plays a little bit into some of the other work that you're doing more around, I'm going to say like energy work with which
Mhm.
like drop in some seeds into some of the other
Yeah,
stuff that you do. But I also believe that we are exhausted, right? And so then there is that way of like what I and one of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about at this Alive experience was also how do we hold space and create space for healing as we start reimagining and like really doing this shifting around what is how do we as individuals, how do we as the our local communities, how do we like all along, how do we work on healing so that we're not creating a version of the future from a broken space, right? Broken energetically, spiritually, physically, any of those things. And that's where it takes time. And it's the counterintuitive to this narrative around speed, 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 like you're going to be left behind. But I know for myself of being able to now do some more deep energy healing work that I also feel like being able to start working and re-regulating the system, the number of ideas that I and the types of ideas that now can flesh in is just like unbelievable. And
so
that
much.
can't come from a state when we're like up here in like fight or flight survival mode. And I think unfortunately so many of us are in survival mode right now. And so that's where when I think a little bit and I said this right before we got started, it's interesting because when I think about like being a certified futurist, I sometimes then have this imposter syndrome, which again, I think women can all like, I don't know a single woman who hasn't said that they could suffer from that. But I think because I like think of it where like the people that you and I are both trained through, they came out of Disney, and like these futurists that are just like, so amazing. And I'm like, that's not me. But I'm like, but I actually believe. So coming back to also like, as we evolve as our own people, the impact that I think I'm supposed to make with this work is actually just helping people and reminding people that we all have the power in whatever aspect of our lives are to think differently about the future. And that to be able to do that we all, and if I, even just me saying, I give you the permission, because again, as women, we sometimes
Right.
really need somebody to tell us. So it's almost like, how do we create these little permission slips for ourselves? I give you the permission to just spend a little bit of time clearing out some of that energy that you have, thinking a little bit differently about yourself and the world around you so that you can start seeing the unbelievable, amazing opportunities that can lay in front of us. But we have to be the ones to step off the crazy, like, treadmill of life
Right.
because no one's going to push stop for us. And so we have to actually remember that we are the ones determining what our future is going to be. And a lot of times that means just push and stop for like a hot minute and to say, am I racing towards the wrong direction? And what if there could be like 12 forks in the road and I went and explored a couple of them just to see what it could be? But again, we have to be the ones doing that because we are the ones in charge of our own futures.
That's so true. I
Mhm.
know you just gave us a really good tidbit of information of things we can do. But before we end, if listeners could walk away with just one mindset shift about the future,
Yeah.
what do you think that would be?
I think a huge thing that we talk a lot about, and so this would just be even for the next like day, right? Or week. What else? Ask yourself like a couple different questions, like what else could be true? Or what if the opposite was true? So when you're reading something, when you're hearing something, when you have a thought, when you're having a conversation, we naturally, again, it's our own mind's way of doing things, um, is being able, like, we're going to interpret something and say, this is good, this is bad. I can see this is the an outcome from it. And then you stop there. Challenge yourself to think of the opposite. So whatever that is, because what you're trying to start doing is to think in multiples. And again, that's kind of going the extreme and it's a speed way of being able to do it. I think this is going to be really amazing. Then say, if that wasn't going to be really amazing, like what would make this really not amazing? Like what would whatever? Or we read something, I'm like, that feels good to myself. Like this is whatever. But like what would somebody who had a different perspective on
Mhm.
this think if it was the opposite? And that's just starting to teach ourselves to see things again in different ways. That I think is one of like the number one thing. And then asking people also, as you're out talking to people and wanting to start being like, I'm going to say collector of stories or the collector of dots. A vet who is one of our mentors in the futures work, she said something and it's always stayed with me. You can't connect the dots until you collect the dots. And so
Right.
I always think about those like dot, dot, dot things from when we were a kid. And if you had 10 dots, you would get this like stick figure picture, but those ones that would take like hours to be able to do that makes the most like amazing lion with this kind of crazy hair. And it has like 500 dots that are so small, but the
Mhm.
picture becomes so beautiful. So, where can you be a collector of dots also? And think about these different little tidbits. You don't have to connect them yet. You just have to start collecting and like create something, whether it's in your notes app or at home, like little sticky notes. What are just interesting things that you heard that you have no idea what they actually even mean or why it's giving you some sort of like feeling in your body? Just collect them for a little bit. And then pause and step back and say, oh, this is really interesting, right? This is what then starts to happen. Then you start to say, like, what are the patterns and themes that are coming with my horizon scans? And then you start seeing, like, there's something here that I think is really interesting. And that's going to be what's going to start to shine the light on, like, where you should start to explore. So I guess my simple is asking yourself, what else could be true? Or what if the opposite was true? As just a way to challenge yourself and then be an active participant of collecting dots for a little while and then start figuring out how to start connecting them. But don't even think about connecting them yet. Just start collecting them.
Yeah, that's an excellent analogy. I just did a museum tour of
Mm.
impressionist art, and we were talking about pointillism. And the whole thing with pointillism is they just put dots. And if you get
Mhm.
really close to that painting, all you see is a bunch of dots. But when you
Mhm.
stand back, you can see a person or
Mhm.
you can see a landscape or trees or whatever. And all it was dots, but
Mhm.
it made an impression of some
And it
sort
takes
on
one
people.
dot to get started, right?
Yep.
And when they're doing that, you might have an idea or a vision. And I think that we, or I could say for myself, I am one who always wants to jump to the answer, right? And so it's teaching ourselves to actually not try to jump to assume what those dots are trying to tell you. Just sit in the curiosity for a while because that's the emergent part of alive. Certain things are going to bubble up that you never would have thought about. But if you don't hold space to allow something to emerge, you could be missing like the coolest parts.
That is so good. Thank you so much for joining us today,
Yeah,
Katie. And for the listeners out there, as always, stay connected, stay grounded. Until next time. Thank you for joining Rooted Conversations by Reinnovate You Coaching. and for seeking clarity and truth in your health and wellness journey. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave a review. It helps us grow and reach more listeners like you. For resources and updates, follow us on social media or visit riucoaching.com. Until next time, stay grounded, stay curious, and keep growing. As a reminder, this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be medical advice. I am not a medical provider. I am a PhD, not an MD, and nothing in these conversations should be used to diagnose, treat, or replace care from a qualified healthcare professional. Always consult your doctor or trusted healthcare provider regarding any questions or concerns about your health.